Good morning. We'll be starting up in about 2 minutes. And good morning, yes. There is a handout. It will be available in the chat. So you can get it now, or we'll reload that for those who come in later. And you also may want to go ahead and either get the Poll EV app or go to pollev.com/David Orr PE. We'll be using polls throughout the webinar today. And we'll be starting up in just about a little under a minute. So good morning and welcome to the penultimate, the next to last of our winter series of webinars. My name is David Orr. I'm the director here with the New York State LTAP Center, the Cornell Local Roads program. And today we're going to be talking about surface and subsurface drainage, which is a little bit timely with the rains we had yesterday. A little bit of snow this morning, but not too bad. And again, we're going to be taking polls. Using pollev.com, there's a handout. You can open up your chat pod to get that. The chat pod's disabled for you to put information in, but you can use the Q&A pod. We do recommend you do that. In fact, we'll be using that throughout the hour today. And I may ask you to raise your hands now and then, okay? This particular webinar is worth 1 professional development hour for engineers here in New York State. And only the person who's registered gets that credit. And it is considered a course. If you're from another state, you'll need to check with your LTAP center in that particular state to see what the rules are in terms of professional development hours. So let's start with a little bit of a welcome. Again, we're going to be using pollev.com/David Orr PE, and we're going to be doing a series of polls to find out who's on the session today out of the little over 80 of you. That's pretty cool. Okay. So first, who do you work for? Town, county, city or village, state or federal, tribal, a consultant, a contractor, or how many of you are working for the weekend? And this helps me just get a sense of things going on here. So nice blend. That's nice to see. Okay. So I know some state folks are probably at the bridge inspectors meeting. We've got 2 things going on at the same time. Amanda Link is over there and Adam Howell is helping me here in the background. And it's always great to have great staff helping you out. If you can't access the polls, you can throw them in the Q&A and I'll sort of add them in mentally or mention them as we go through. Okay. Now your job, are you an administrator? Are you the highway superintendent, DPW commissioner? Are you an engineer? Are you a field crew person, a supervisor, a board member, or none of the above? And I see some people had put in the previous thing, there were town, a couple of state people. So cool. Okay, so a lot of you are engineers, okay, that's good to know, but it's also good to see we have some highway officials here, some administrators, okay. Okay, and then next on the plate, how long have you been in your current position? Now we started asking this question at the beginning of the year and got quite a few folks who are brand new highway officials starting in January, but haven't seen as many, but I do see one today that's less than a month. And over here on the Q&A, we've got a variety of folks, 6 years, less than a year. Okay. So again, quite a variety, and that's good. hopefully you'll pick something up today that you can take home and use and go from there. I see a 40 plus. Okay. Maybe we'll have you help teach us in the future. And then where in the state are you? Are you outside of New York even? You can put a little click right on the map. I see somebody put in the Q&A they're from Oneonta, so that adds to where we're located from. We've got a person out of New Jersey, okay. So quite a variety. There is some differences in how we have to deal with drainage depending upon where we are, okay. But it's good to see a variety of folks. Surprisingly, very few in the southern tier, but we have somebody who's swimming in Lake Ontario. Hope they're doing the watermelon crawl. There we go. Just as a reminder, we do have one more webinar next week on flagging, and we do have some online workshops. Next week is local federal aid and then powers and duties in the spring, and our in-person workshop series starts week after next. And we're across New York State. And I'll give you a reminder of this at the end. So let's go ahead and get started in talking about drainage. And other than the polls, you won't see much text. We're just having a little bit of fun with lots of pictures today. So we're going to start with, what drainage looked like, or roads looked like over 100 years ago. This is a picture from ARTBA. And you can see roads were in pretty bad shape. But a lot of that is due to the quality of the drainage that they had, or more importantly, they didn't have, okay? So, roads move vehicles from one point to another, and if they're impassable in parts of the year, like spring, fall, that we're getting a little bit of now, that's a bit of a problem. So we need to do a better job, and drainage is where we have to start. Now, to deal with that, we've got to deal with water coming out of the sky. That water could be in the form of snow, it could be in the form of rain. This is a picture from up in Oswego. You can see they got a lot of lake effect snow, and it was actually safer to drive them at night. But you can imagine what would happen when all this melts. If we get a quick melt, that can be some serious flooding, okay? Now, when we do our full day class, and we're going to be taking out this spring, the full day class for a week, we like to break it into two parts, the roadway and the roadside. Today, we're going to be focusing mostly on the roadway itself. We're going to be talking about the subsurface water, the materials we use to build the water, getting the water off the roadway, like the roof of a barn, and subsurface drains. So that's the focus on today. Somebody asked, what year was that in Oswego? It was in the late 1990s. I remember that it was taken by Don Morey. He sent me the pictures. They had lake effect. The wind stayed in the same directions for about 10 days. And there were places they had drifts over 30 feet. It was pretty amazing. So yeah, I don't remember the exact year. I'd have to go back and look it up. So what I'm going to do, I'm going to start with a couple of typical drainage problems, and we're going to end with some more typical drainage problems. And I want to see what your thoughts are on what you would do to fix the problem. Because in some respects, what I really want to focus on is figuring out the solutions for typical drainage problems that we see, okay? Now, what I'm going to be doing when I do this, I'm going to show you a picture. I'll describe it a little bit, and then I'll give you a poll everywhere and let you put an answer in, okay? So here's the picture, I'll come right back, but there'll be a solutions page that comes up like this, and you can put your answers in on what do you think you would fix. In this case, you can see the road is pretty well washed out. So let's see what folks came up with for solutions, okay? Nobody's replied yet. Oh, here comes one, replacement. Somebody in the Q&A pod put reconstruction. Yeah, sometimes drainage problems are easy. You know what you need to do. It's pretty expensive to replace it, okay? And so we're gonna probably have to do something major here. Now, this particular situation is one where actually what it turns out is it's actually failed twice in 1 year because of major rain events. Okay, this was around when Irene and Lee came through. If you'll notice, the land is a little bit higher than the roadway in a few spots, especially when you get down here towards the end, there's a spot. Even here, the road's a little bit higher. And what happened was the road became like a stream channel. And a lot of our older roads, this happens. You want to make sure the water can get away. So when you do reconstruct, think about the drainage, think about long-term. You certainly don't want to have to come back and do this particular one again. So keep that in mind as we talk about things, okay? Now let's see if this works here. Okay. And come in here, I'm going to clear the responses if this will work here. There we go. Perfect. Did it work? Yeah, it worked. Okay, so let's go to our next problem here. Okay. Our next one is a roadway that is chip sealed, had been chip sealed the previous year, and this is in the spring. Weather not too different than we've been seeing the last few days, and you can see the chip seal has failed. Okay, so what do you think is the solution here? Okay. What do you think is the solution here? Somebody said repave in the Q&A. Okay, pave it. Maybe a mill and pave. Okay. Nobody's put anything in the poll EV, or at least it hasn't shown up yet. Maybe a new wearing course. But again, when we're dealing with roadways, we're dealing with drainage. You need to think about where the water problem is coming from. And knowing some history can really help. And you got to think about the drainage. In this particular case, we'll go back to the picture. This had been a gravel road for many, many years. It actually is going down a pretty good hill, and there's actually a relatively good crown. Okay. I'll see if I can get the poll EV to show up. Maybe they're just not showing up for some reason. But let me just quickly check that and see what's going on here. Well, let's see if it'll show up here. Ah, technology. There we go. Got it working now. Okay, so look at the sub base, look at ditching. Okay. It turns out in this particular case, the ditches are actually fine. The ditches are more than adequate to drain the base. We're not going to be talking much about ditches today, but they're more than adequate. They're deep enough. The real problem is the material used to make the roadway. It had too many fines in it. We'll come back to that in a little bit, but need to think about where the water problem really is occurring. And if you've got too many fines in your base, your roadway is going to fail. And again, we'll talk about that in more detail. Now, before we go too far, I wanted to show a short video that explains how roads work and what happens with water around them. Okay, and so here's a video shot by the U.S. Forest Service. Watch the green dots. It's a short video that shows you the damage to the trucks. It only takes 81 passes for the roadway to look like this. That would not be a well-designed roadway, but you'll notice it was a high water table. It was built to fail. It was part of a research project. It failed prematurely, but mainly because of poor drainage issues. Okay, so keep that in mind as we're thinking about how roadways fail. They fail because of too much bending. Water makes them, of course, more likely to bend. So one of the first things we have to think about with surface and subsurface water is getting the water off. It's a lot like a barn, if you think about it, or a house. You've got to have a good crown. The water has to get away. There's water sitting in the roadway. It's going to go down into the pavement. So the first thing to think about is making sure you have a good crown. And this is especially important on gravel roadways. Okay, so if we look at our roadway, we need to have a nice crown on the roadway. If we have a paved road, we're going to have a different crown than if we're going to have a gravel road. Now, I'm going to ask you, if you have a gravel road that you maintain, or if you're an engineer in one of the towns or county that you work for maintains a gravel road, raise your hand. Put your hand up and see how many of you deal with gravel roads on a regular basis. Okay. 8, so a few of you, 10% or so of you have gravel roads. Now, turns out there's actually more gravel roads in the United States than any other type. There's more gravel than blacktop or concrete or even brick. but that's a different discussion for a different day. But if you think about it, if you've got a roadway that is paved, okay, we'll do paved over on this side. You need to have a cross slope that's a little flatter because you got a nice hard surface that can drain off. So here we usually use 2% or 1/4 inch per foot. If it's gravel, okay, or unpaved, we might be as much as 6%, okay, to drain the water away, okay? And we want to drain the base as well, so we need each layer to have that same slope to it so the water can drain out. And we don't want to trap water out here on the edge, so we want a free draining layer if at all possible. Now, obviously, you can't do that in an urban area, but it really does help quite a bit to have that slope. Now, if you're getting a chip seal, you might go with a little bit steeper than 2%. It's not quite paved, a little rougher. And the other thing you want to make sure you think about is these shoulders over here. Those shoulders need to have a little bit extra cross slope to them. Okay, so these are things to think about, getting the water off the roof, through our gutters, our ditches. So here's a picture for you of a roadway in the Adirondacks at about this time of year. Okay, things are still mostly frozen. As I'm driving the roadway, I see these potholes down here on the bottom of the picture. What do you think caused the potholes? You can throw that in the Q&A. We won't do a poll for this particular one. But what do you think caused those potholes? Standing water, freeze thaw, all good possibilities. Poor drainage, yep. Too flat, there you go, somebody got it. It's too flat. This is a real well-known problem for gravel roads, is if they get a flat spot, vehicles travel on that flat spot and they create this problem. So crowns are very important. You got to get the water off the roadway, okay? Now there's a series of videos out by the South Dakota LTAP Center that are pretty cool. And we'll just show a little bit on roadway shape, small snippet. If you want the longer one, look it up or get a hold of us, we can get you a copy. So you need a shape to it. The water's got to go off to the sides. The main purpose of the shape of all these elements is to drain water efficiently. Drain the water away. Number one item on a good roadway. And yes, safety is part of it. By putting a crown on the driving surface, you're keeping the road safe by making sure water drains off into the ditch. So you got to get the water off the roadway. Well, if you don't get the water off, it doesn't matter what the quality of the material is. It's going to be weaker than it should be. In this case, a ditch got plugged, water got on the road, it didn't have enough of a crown, it's saturated. And you can see in the lower left corner, there's a rut. That rut was caused by one pass of an old Ford or Econoline van that we no longer have. I hit it about 5 miles an hour. If I hit it any faster, the van would still be there. Now, some would say it's a Ford, not a loss, but hey, we had that thing for another 25 years. So come on, we needed to keep it in good shape. So drainage is part of it. The other part that's a problem, though, that I found was there was no gravel in the mix. That gravel is important to the roadway. There was sand, clay, and silt, mostly silt. When you're building a roadway, the single most important thing is the quality of the base. Okay, you got to subgrade the native material. You can't do a lot about that unless you want to spend a lot of money. But your base, you can spend money and create a good base. Okay, so what is a good base in most of New York State because of our freeze-thaw conditions that we deal with? Well, you want to have percent of gravel. Okay, you want to be between 50 and 70% gravel. So you need a lot of gravel sized particles. These are the larger particles. And in your handout, we list the sizes that are available. So you really want the gravel to give you strength. No matter where you are in that prism of the roadway, you need about 25 to 40% sand. The sand helps you with drainage, helps make it dense, pack well, but it still allows the water to have some flowing characteristics. And then there are two lines that we have here. One line is at 8%, and that's sort of the maximum for anything underneath the pavement. I'd really like 5, but I'll live with 8. And we'll talk about why 8% in a little bit, but 8% is sort of the upper limit. Okay. The other number that we have here is 15%. Anything above about 15% in spring thaw, it's just a mess. There's not enough strength to it. You've got to keep the fines content down, the silts and the clays. Okay. So this is important. And if you've got a roadway that's got a little bit too much silt and clay in it, the negative effects start to get hold of you. And if you're buying, for instance, state spec item 4, as we call it, but it's actually a type 4 spec, it's for sub-base. It's for deeper layers underneath a really good base, underneath a blacktop. It was done by the state DOT, where, remember, the state is paving both the upper and the secondary layer. Okay. And in that particular case, it's pretty clean. Asphalt concrete has got no fines or very little fines in it because it's all bound up by the asphalt. So be careful about buying quote unquote item 4. It's a spec that actually technically hasn't existed as a separate spec since 1973. Okay. But if you've got a good drainage underneath and you've got a good quality gravel underneath, you're going to have a really pretty good looking road. Okay. So this is what we really would like to see. We don't want to see something like this. Okay. Now I can tell you, this could be due to age. This could be to the quality underneath. This could be due to some freeze thaw issues. Without a test, without digging down, I really don't know for sure. Without some knowledge and some history, I don't really know for sure. But once it gets to this point, obviously, we've really got to look what's going on underneath. Now, this particular picture I took the day after that I took it, they paved over the top of this. We showed this in the pavement maintenance webinar last week. It's really critical. We've got to make sure that we take care of the subsurface drainage before we do anything on the surface. In this case, there's water coming up through the roadway up here. The road's got bad cracking. Somebody did some crack repairs. By the way, they did them the same day before they paved it. Not a good idea. But more importantly, there's problems underneath. Don't throw good money after bad. You've got to fix the drainage. Okay. Now, assuming you've got a good surface, okay, that's critical. We've got a good surface, we've got a good roof, we've got good gravel underneath. Okay, we got to put shoulders on the side of the roadway. Okay, so why did we put shoulders? I'm going to throw up a poll EV for you. What is the purpose of shoulders on our particular roadway, on any roadway? Okay, why do we put up shoulders? Take a sip of my coffee while I wait for some answers. Safety actually is one. Emergencies, yeah, okay. Drainage. One of the most important things shoulders do is that if we wind up running off the road a little bit, just a small amount for emergencies, it doesn't cause us to have a crash. Okay, so that's important. I see road support showing up a lot. That's really important. We back that roadway up so it doesn't push out, it doesn't crack. Yeah, it stabilizes it, everything. Drainage is in the list. It helps carry the water from the roadway down to the ditch. That's why it typically has a slightly steeper slope, because it builds up over time and it tends to be rougher. So it needs to have a little bit safer, a little bit of a slope to it. Not a huge rollover, but a little bit of rollover. Now, what I don't see on here, and I'm a little surprised by, but we all do live in the north. Maybe everybody forgot about the fact that 2 days ago, there was lots of snow still all over the place. We do use those shoulders to store snow when we don't have time to cut the shoulders. Okay, so sometimes we'll use them for snow storage. Okay, so let's look at a picture that's taken about the same time. Here's a shoulder that's not doing the job. Okay, it wasn't, you know, the water can't get off. You couldn't really pull off safely. You couldn't really store snow there. And actually, if we want to, we could try to fill in the cracks. And, you know, I can start to fill in the cracks here. And I'd spend the next 20 minutes doing that. There's cracks all over the place. You've got to get the water off the roadway, and the shoulders are a really important part of that. Okay. And of course, this time of year, when we get that snow runoff, we get that melt, if it gets trapped on the roadway, it leads to safety issues at night. Okay. Maybe skaters like it, but it also allows that water to get underneath the roadway. So you really want to get the water off. It's the #1 key. Okay. Somebody asked in the Q&A, what's the name of the device or tool you'll use to measure the proper slope for a road, the crown? There are 4 or 5 ways you can measure that. I'm a big fan of the hand level and an engineer or carpenter's rule, and you can just measure that out. You might use a tape measure. Some people make a grade board. They'll take a 4 by 4 foot level. You can use just a 4 foot level, but they'll also make ones 8, 10 feet long out of plywood, and they can actually put a notch on it to adjust the level, and you can measure the grade that way. Construction people really like those, and they fit in the back of a pickup truck. And of course, you could survey it, but most of the time we're using hand tools because we're trying to just do it in the field, okay? Now, shoulders need to be cut, but when they're cut, they need to be done properly, and that's done with a grater, okay? There is a technique you can use, other tools, but the grater is really the best tool for the job. A snowplow is the worst tool for the job, okay? This happened, somebody pushed it with a snowplow. You can see where they hit the edge of the shoulder and they threw stuff in people's yard, okay? And all this is really going to do is help get water back under the roadway. You can actually see where it's saturating the roadway. You can see spots where we're starting to get some incipient cracking going on. And of course, you're going to get that neighbor who's a little bit upset with you because you pushed dirt and stuff into their yard and can't really say that I blame them. So got to cut shoulders on a regular basis, but you got to get it so the water can drain away. Number 1 rule. Now, one thing I haven't mentioned is urban areas. Curbs and gutters act as our shoulder and ditches in an urban area. So they're pretty important as well because they're carrying the water. Now, when you're doing subsurface water investigations, and we're going to be talking about that in the second half of our hour together, that's the perfect time to think about putting in any subsurface drains when you're putting in your curbs and you're putting in your gutters. And remember, you need to drain that base out as well, either by having subsurface drains, taking the water, subsurface water down to your stormwater system. You're not going to be able to come in here and put in a free draining layer. I don't think people would like it if you start putting ditches back in their front yards. So again, think about where the water is going. Don't trap that water, okay? Now we have a picture taken by a guy by the name of Jay Olson. He gives us permission to show it. We give him credit, and we have to read his quote. It says, drainage is critical for roadway design. Ducts are an indicator of poor drainage, okay? Here's a picture from Cornell, taken, probably 23, 24 years ago. You can see the water just won't get off the roadway, okay? You got to get the water off the roadway. They reconstructed that road a few years ago, and you can see it's a little bit better in terms of drainage. They've got a lot more manholes, a lot more catch basins. They've actually got a rain garden over there on the left side where they're catching water, okay? So it's a pretty cool operation, okay? Now, something we have to worry about at the end of winter or in the middle of winter is freeze thaw, okay? Freeze thaw, in fact, is actually one of the drivers on the quality of our gravel. So got to be thinking about that. So let me explain freeze thaw to you. It's really because of combination of permeability and capillarity. So let me start by showing you a video on capillarity. Watch, this is a time-lapse video. We poured water into a frost tube. There's a reservoir at the bottom, and you can see how the water actually pulls up over time from the reservoir at the bottom, okay? The finer the material, the higher it's gonna rise. You can see in only 1 hour, it's up a good almost 3.5 inches, okay, from the water surface. And over time, it will go right to the top of this little sand column, which is 8, 9 inches tall, okay? If it's a really fine material like a silt, it can be even higher, and clays can even be higher than that. So capillarity is an issue. And of course, we also worry how quickly does the water flow through these various materials, okay? So just to show you that one more time, you can see how quickly it goes up. Now, why does this matter? Well, because if you have that free water available, it gets pulled up by capillarity, you can actually get frost lenses forming. Here's a video from the Army Corps of Engineers. There's a newer version on the web. The video part I'm going to show you is still the same, though. It's still an old frost cabinet with a high-tech timing device. Okay, so here's the video, frost action in soils. And you can see the time lapse of actual frost issues. Now they've got it in a freezing cabinet.
When projected at normal speed.
And you can see what's going on here. It's a time lapse.
Of several weeks is seen in several minutes.
Okay. And we'll see if this thing will keep playing. There we go. So there's our high-tech timing device. And you can see the scale over on the left is moving, and there's the line of frost that they show you in the video. This is a silty material, okay, which is really bad for frost issues. And it started the experiment when they did this at a water content of, cue the number. Okay, I'm off by a second. 19% water. So a lot of water in there. That's a pretty high amount of water. Okay, but remember, there's a pool of water at the bottom being pulled up by capillarity available. And if there is that pool of water available, there are little ice lenses forming and picking the roadway up. And that's not good because it creates heaving, which we don't really want to have for a variety of reasons. Now, when they did this particular experiment in this video, they had to move the camera and their high-tech timing device to the bottom, and the frost keeps moving. Now, this is a 6-inch high sample. 19% at the start, water content at the end, 55%. A huge amount of water pulled into their sample. That's not good for anybody. And of course, 4 inches of heaving, that's 2/3 the height of the sample. Now, this is a New Hampshire silt, which is again, really a bad material. There's 2 issues. 1, you get the movement of the roadway. 2, all that water is now in the roadway, and it may not be thin lenses, it may be thick ones like this. This one's 3/4 of an inch across. I have run across culverts being replaced in the winter because they were having problems, and 1, 2, 3-inch lenses of ice are not uncommon, especially when we get these kind of materials we have, glacial tills here in New York State. So all that water's got to drain out. And of course, it may not drain out where we want it to drain out. So keep that in mind. And of course, it leads to our friend, the pothole. And we are entering pothole season, though we actually had that last month with that first thaw that we've got. Look underneath, make sure you take care of your drainage, and make sure you get your surface in good shape as well. Now, you could do what they do in Vermont. They just put up a sign that says frost heaves, okay? That may not be our first choice. Now, we cannot replace down below the depth of frost. Frost depths vary quite a bit in New York State, but they're going to be 2-3 feet or more, depending where you are in the state. And if you put in good clean material, it turns out the frost actually goes deeper because those clean materials freeze faster. So don't try to just go below the depth of the frost. We're not building a foundation for a house and water lines, we're building a roadway. So try to have a uniformity to everything so the road goes up and down as a unit. That actually works. In fact, that's what's actually happening on most of our roadways. Now, here's a picture I took coming back from a hockey tournament. No, I was up to Lake Placid for a conference and about 20 years ago. And I'm driving through the Adirondacks, and we went under a bridge in a place called Pindera near Old Forge. And you can see it was paved around the corner. It looked really nice. But by the following spring, the road had already begun to heave. Now, this is a bit of a challenge. There's a culvert going diagonally underneath the railroad bridge. You can actually see the location of it because it's heaved, and the culvert stayed the same. It's a box. Very difficult to fix. Eventually, the state had to come in and put approach slabs to reduce this problem. Very difficult for that particular situation, but don't just pave it if you know you've got a heaving problem. And if you're thinking, well, that's a problem only because of the high box culvert. Well, no, it happens on a lot of pavements. Here's another place. Obviously, the yellow lines I added to the picture, you can actually see a dip in the center line for the roadway. I don't think that was put in that way. What's happened is there's a small, I think 12-inch corrugated metal pipe underneath there. It stays perfectly still, and the road heaved up around it because we backfilled it with nice clean material. All of us as engineers, we like to spec clean material that doesn't frost heave. But the road around it moved because it does frost heave. So let's go back to our drawing that we had before. Remember, I showed you these percentages, and I mentioned there was a line here at 8%, that breakpoint line, where I don't want to be above 8% for my base gravel. And the reason is it turns out above about 8%, the frost action starts to become a dominant feature in the mix. And so this is a problem for us. If you're using that type 4 material, the sub-base material in the state spec, it allows 10%. And so you can get frost heaving even though you're getting material that's inside the specification. So 8% or less is even better. 5% would be even better than that. Reducing that frost characteristic, reducing how much water it holds as it pulls the water up in the middle of the winter and stays soft in the spring. And yeah, somebody put into the Q&A that if you've got a bridge like the one in Thendara, frost effects may affect the height clearance. And yeah, when I worked in Yates County, we had a railroad bridge where it would actually change. You could see it over the year. The roadway would move. So you have to think about that. What is your actual clearance? It's the lowest clearance during the winter when the road's heaped up, okay? If you've got a road that looks like this in the spring, and you see little spots all over, don't just assume the pavement is old. Check it out, do a test pit, check to see what's going on underneath. I will not be surprised if you start seeing fines contents higher than 8%. 12, 13, 14% would not be uncommon. So look carefully at good quality in the gravel, and then you can think about putting in subsurface drains, okay? Now, when a pavement is frozen in the winter, it is extremely strong. That is when the pavement is strongest, is when it's completely frozen. But of course, when spring thaw comes along, it thaws from the top down. Yeah, a little from the bottom, but mostly from the top down because of this thing called the sun. Okay, that's where the heat comes from. If you've got material on the outside that's dirty, or just because of snow acting as an insulator, it takes longer for the shoulders to thaw, and you can actually get a saturated zone of water. And obviously, if you've got a saturated zone of water here in the middle, capillarity pulling the water up into your base and your roadway itself, it's going to be extremely weak. This is a picture sent to us by a gentleman out of Albany, used to work for us, Jim Markle. And you can actually see there's actually clear water coming out of the roadway. It had created a frost pimple. The water was literally boiling up out of the roadway in the spring, okay? Part of this is a side hill situation. We see this a lot. We put in good clean material in a side hill situation. You can see the side hill over here on the far side of the photograph. There's water pressure and it wants to go where it can. Well, we put in good clean material and it pops out in the roadway. So this is a perfect example where we need to think about maybe intercepting the water before it gets to the roadway. And we'll come back to subsurface drains in a minute, but let's finish the discussion of the roadway itself, okay? Now, if you got a really soft soil underneath, you may think about putting in a geocell or geogrid or something to help spread that load out. Great option, but do me a favor. When you do that, a lot of times we like to put a separation fabric in here to separate the subgrade from the roadway itself. Take that fabric, make sure it goes outside the edge of any geocells or geogrids so that you don't get an edge effect problem. So take it out, it's cheap insurance, okay, to keep those materials from mixing together, pumping together. Now here's a drainage blanket situation that somebody used, a pretty cool idea. You wrap the roadway base, or sub-base actually in this case, with fabric, and you create a big open void by filling it up with some good big clean stones. So you make essentially a French drain the whole width of the roadway, a drainage blanket. Really good idea. A couple of things to be wary of. Number one is don't use rounded stone. You don't need big rocks. You just need single-sized rocks. So you could actually use number ones or number twos that compact pretty well. Heck, you could even use concrete sand. And you wouldn't even need fabric in that particular case because it will still drain amazingly well. In this case, because they couldn't get it to keep from moving because the silt underneath was really bad, they tried to put the layer of gravel on top and compact 24 inches in one pass. That doesn't work too well. And now the roadway is starting to show signs of dying prematurely. So something to keep in mind. Drainage is key, but how you build it is key as well. And if you're going to use a fabric anywhere near the roadway surface, we recommend using the non-woven, the more pliable felt-like fabric than a woven material. This is a woven. It's more puncture prone. And if it does puncture, all the water and clay and silt and everything tends to want to go to that particular one spot. So keep that in mind as you're thinking about as we move forward, if you're going to use fabric as a separation material. So let's talk about subsurface drains. We've talked about the surface, the quality of the gravel. Okay, let's talk a little bit about subsurface drains. Now, the two ways you can get water out of the base, you can have a free draining layer. Okay, over here you get the water coming out the side. And yeah, there's probably some organics on the surface with some grass and things like that. But for the most part, as long as it's not too thick, the water can get out that side. It's a free draining layer, and we like that. And in rural areas, that's really preferred in a lot of ways, but can't always do that. In an urban area, you would have curb and gutter that would stop you, or sidewalks. And a lot of times the roadway got built up over time. So we put a subsurface drain in, okay, to take the water primarily from the base, but we get a little bit of drainage from the subgrade as well. So that's subsurface drains. Now, those are great tools, but we have an old road system, okay? And those old roads have been widened over time, okay? This particular road is either, and I can never figure it out, I've looked in the books and I don't know for sure, it's from a book put out in 1908 by the Department of Public Roads, which is nowadays called the State Department of Transportation. And it's either the Jericho Turnpike or the Sunrise Highway. They're a little wider today than this, and they're paved. Now, hopefully, every time you pave a roadway and you make it a little bit wider, you do a good job of making sure the base is out beyond the edge of the pavement, and preferably a free draining layer if you've got an open system. But you and I both know that's not what always happens. You know, we might have had an old roadway that was only this wide, and out here on the edge, we had some dirty material. So when we widened it, if we just paved it wide, that dirty material is still there and the water can't get out, okay? So if you came in here and you had that dirty material, okay, and you thought, oh, I'll just stick a subsurface drain here at the edge of the pavement and I'll take care of my problem, it's not gonna work, because now the water is trapped in the middle. You've created a bathtub, okay? There was actually a time when that was actually a standard. We would build the road into the soil, the native soil, and it wasn't great. You got to get those materials drained out. Now, what does the road look like that has that problem? Well, this might look familiar to some of you. The center of the roadway looks pretty good, but that outside 1, 2, 3, or in this case, I hate to say it, 4 or 5 feet are all breaking up. Coming over here at the edge and putting in a subsurface drain is not going to do us any good, okay? We've probably got to look at the base underneath. Subsurface drains really only do 3 things for us, and we have to keep that in mind, okay? So let's talk about what the 3 things a subsurface drain does. The first things that subsurface drains do, and normally we put them at the edge, they come in here, we put in a subsurface drain, and it intercepts the flow of the water. Okay, heck, the ditch does that a little bit as well, by the way, but don't go too deep on the ditch. But now, if you think about it, the water's going to drain down to this. It'll come back up pretty quick too. Okay, but we intercept a lot of the flow of the water. We trap it before it gets to the roadway. Now, it'd be nice if we could go all the way down here to say there's an impervious layer deeper down. It would be really nice if we could do that, because then we intercept 100% of the water. It's not economical. 3-4 feet is usually the maximum depth, and unless you've got an impervious layer fairly close, you're not going to find that. But intercepting can be very useful, okay? And yes, it has to be perforated. Subsurface drains are actually made out of perforated pipe, okay? When we put them in, HDPE is the common one we use today. We actually used to use many years ago around houses, clay, you may come across that, or we used old PVC with holes drilled in it. If you ever come across that, hopefully the holes are on the bottom, okay? How you backfill those is important, okay? We actually recommend concrete sand, because again, I don't have to use a fabric, but the key is you can intercept the water before it gets to your roadway. Think about where the water is coming from. Look in your side hill situations. There are times when actually agencies have actually come into the ditch line and they put their subsurface drain there. It doesn't have to be at the edge of the shoulder, but a lot of times we like it in the edge of the shoulder, because really, remember, one of the primary things is we're draining out the base. We don't want any extra water in the base that hopefully is clean and drains real well, okay? The other thing you can do is you could theoretically use it to lower the water table. Okay, so I'll put my subsurface drain in. Okay, I'll put it on both sides. We like it on both sides in this particular case because we draw the water down. Didn't do much good over here. So in this case, it may not have helped that much. But if we were in a low fill situation where maybe the water table was really high, you know, a fill like over here and the water was running like here, we'd lower that water table a little bit. But remember that there's going to be a redraw between the drains. And if there's a lot of capillarity, it'll help, but not as much as you think. A lot of times when we put in drains on both sides in a flat area, very useful, but what we're really doing is intercepting the water from both sides, as well as draining the base of the roadway itself. So we kill two birds with one stone, hypothetical birds, not real ones. And we protect our roadway, keep the subsurface water from getting to the roadway. And if we have a good surface, that works really well. But remember, here's what drains really are doing, whether they have a pipe in it, perforated, or they're just a French drain with no pipe. Gotta get some water before I cough too much. What they're really doing is pulling a water that comes out by gravity, okay? It's like taking a sponge. Put a sponge tonight when you're washing dishes, let it get soaked and pick it up. Water is gonna drain out of it, okay? But at some point it'll stop. But there's still a lot of water in that sponge, okay? You squeeze it, all that extra water is still there. And again, that's why we want that fines content to be as low as possible, because more fines, it holds on to more water, okay? So you really want to get the fines content as low as possible, especially in the base of the roadway. Now, where we put it, we mentioned somebody already asked about that. We usually put it on the edge, okay? Sometimes we put it out here on the far end. What do we backfill this up things with? Again, we recommend concrete sand, or if you don't want to use concrete sand, I'm drawing this an extra big just to put the scale. You do extra concrete sand. Let me purposely get a color here that's different. And let me get a color you can see with that background. How about we'll try a green one? That should be pretty good. What you also need to be thinking about is putting in a filter fabric wrapped around the trench to protect it. If you're backfilling it with like a pea stone, because otherwise what will happen over time is the fines, especially from the lower part here in the subgrade, will tend to plug up and cause your system to fail. Now, one of the interesting things is everybody thinks what happens is this fills up with silt over time. What actually happens is whatever you're backfilling it with, it's this interface is what actually fails. That's where the plugging occurs, along that interface point where the water changes velocity. And so that's the filtering effect that you probably remember if you're an engineer from geotech, okay? And so this is something you just have to think about. The deep line will actually help you. You don't need to put a fabric around the pipe, though you can do so. The real key is to make sure you've got good drainage in all of those cases. Now, somebody here says number 35 gravel. Off the top of my head, I'm not quite sure what size number 35 gravel is, but we recommend a pea stone or with a fabric or concrete sand. New York State has a good spec for concrete sand. It's been tested for freezing and thawing and actually drains pretty well. That's the reason we recommend it. And there are agencies who've used that for years. And this is what the pipe looks like. It's a perforated material, okay? Holes all the way around. And part of the other reason you use concrete sand is because the slots are small enough that the concrete sand doesn't go in the slots. The mason sand is too fine, for instance. So you really want a concrete sand or something that's coarser, okay? Now, this particular situation, it's not my first choice. There's several things here that I really don't like. Just for the sake of illustrating, I'm going to change my color back to yellow here. And the flow is here from right to left. The water is going into the pipe, okay? And there are actually 3 subsurface drains here, okay? They're way too close to each other. You've got to think about that and erosion as we bring the water from our roadway back into the ditch line or wherever we're taking it. There's no animal guards on the end of this thing, which I'll illustrate the problem with that in a minute. And This white PVC, we don't want plastic exposed to the sun. We put carbon and other chemicals into HDPE pipe to turn it so that it can be protected mostly from the sun. It does break down eventually, but that black color is to protect it from sunlight. That white PVC is a very limited life, okay? So be careful of that. Better yet, use black HDPE and protect the ends with animal guards. If you don't have animal guards, well, you're gonna make the woodchucks and the other critters very happy. This happens to be a subsurface drain around the administration building here on campus. And there's a woodchuck that I haven't seen him in a couple of years and didn't see him during COVID. So I hope he's okay, but he used to live there. You could catch him on a regular basis if you caught him at the right time of day. And he lived in there on the subsurface drain because they can cut through those black HDPE pipes with their claws. And you made them a nice entrance, okay? So put in animal guards, they really do help quite a bit, okay? So be aware of that and we'll go from there. So this is a quick tour of surface and subsurface drainage. What I'm going to do now is we're going to see how you did, okay? What I'm going to do is show you a series of problems and I want you to help me figure out the solutions, okay? Are we ready? So here's a picture of a roadway. Got a nice crown to it. There is a crown. You don't have to worry about the crown. Crown is good. You can see there's a crack there, okay? So what is your solution? And the pole EV will come up, okay? And I've already got the ones above, so we'll start with the new ones. Cold patch somebody put, okay? Deep reclamation, okay? Regrade the tree lawn and maybe refresh with a chip seal, mill and pave. Somebody said test the soil. Yeah, you need to figure out what's going on, okay? Reconstruct possibly, yeah? And again, we all have limited budgets. So you may be thinking about what can I do short term? What can I be doing longer term? You might think about recycling it. Was the dark spot a pothole? Well, let's go back and look at the picture. No, it's what it is. They had tried to crack repair it. It's beyond crack repair at this particular point because the cracks are too wide. We talk more about that in the pavement maintenance classes that we've got. So it's really too late to do crack repair in this case. Well, what you want to think about is what caused the crack in the first place. Now, I like this photograph, even though it's relatively old. It was taken by our previous director, Lynn Irwin, many years ago. I like it because it looks like it's in the wheel path. And so it looks like it's a structural crack. I'm pretty confident it's not. What it is, it's a classic side hill situation. If you think about it, the ground slope, the original ground slope comes from right to left, okay? And so you go from a cut section over here to a fill section over here. And where those two interfaces meet, a lot of times we wind up with a differential heaving spot. These are probably frost related. Traffic doesn't help, does hurt a little bit, but this is primarily a frost issue. So longer term, you may need to do some cutting and filling and replacing the base, but you also want to make sure of anytime you have a side hill, think about intercepting that water before it gets to the roadway. Does it have a proper cross slope? Now, somebody says, is the crown appropriate or should the surface be superelevated to slant to the left? You can do that, by the way. That is actually done. Let me just come in here and clear all the picture lines because it's easier to draw. Okay. So what he's talking about is having it all slanted to one side or the other, to the left, okay, or to the right. Technically, sometimes they'll actually purposely bring the water back to the slope, especially in mountainous roadways. This road's a little bit too wide. This is actually a state highway. It'd be a little too wide. You definitely want to think about a crown, 10, 12 feet maximum generally for a single slope for the surface. Subsurface, maybe you could do that, but the surface, you would want to have a crown on it, okay? Just a little bit too wide to be able to do that. In fact, if you've ever been on the interstate, they do that on the interstate, and you'll notice sometimes they have problems at the outside edge. They'll actually crown between the lanes. You don't even notice it. It's only a 1 or 2% difference, but they'll sometimes do that with multi-lanes to help keep the water off. Otherwise, you'll get ponding during heavy rain events. So be aware of that. Let's see what our next one is. Ooh, here's a nice one, okay? We're actually up in the Department of Biological and Environmental Engineering here on campus, and people want to know what we grow. We tell them we don't grow anything. We hope to actually have a bad crop. because our most famous crop is potholes. But what do you think the solution is for this? Okay. So let's see what solutions. We'll start here with the was a dark spot pothole. Too many fines, possibly. Somebody put in the Q&A. That's a good thought. That's a really good thought. Could be too many fines. Maybe you got to replace the local sub base with some good material and bring in some fabric. Yeah, that's a possibility. Okay. Okay, good choices. Anything else? Okay. Well, the reason that I like this photograph is it reminds us to make sure we think about what caused the problem in the first place. So we go back and look at our pothole. Now, obviously, short term, we're going to do a pothole patch, and hopefully we'll roll over it with our truck and we can go away for the spring. But the longer term solution, there's two choices. One possibility somebody put in, it's the right one, is putting in an under drain. Subsurface drains, maybe a blanket drain, trap that water. The other one someone mentioned was box it out and put in new material. If it was caused because the material was dirty, had too many fines, above that 8% line or even 5% in some cases, in that particular case, if you replaced it, that'd be the right solution. But if you put in a subsurface drain, it's not going to pull water and it'd be the wrong solution. Vice versa, if the real problem is a subsurface drain issue and you replace it, you've replaced it, it still drains, you still get a pothole. And this happens a lot when we build a brand new roadway, as I mentioned. So doing a test is really important to know what the real problem is so you solve it with the right solution. Okay. Here's one. I think this one should be pretty easy. Hopefully everybody can get this one here. And I'll pop the solution page up, and or somebody put it in the Q&A. Got to cut the shoulders. Yeah. Possibly pave the road. That actually is an important thing to think about. When you pave a roadway, okay, you're going from gravel to paved, okay, be aware of the fact that, remember, a gravel road, we want some fines. That's our binder. And if we just pave over the top of this roadway, now there's too many fines. It's now going to have a problem in the spring. That's what actually happened in our chip seal case that we saw earlier, okay? The fines content was about 12%. Really good gravel surface, but when they chip sealed it, they didn't change the fines content. Now it's too much water and it failed. So be wary of paving a gravel road. Let the traffic help you figure that out. But yeah, cutting the shoulders. Okay. Okay. So what are we going to do in this case? You can see the center of the road is really in bad shape, and the outside edges are a little bit high, possibly. So what do you think the solutions are? Again, you can throw that in the pole EV. Repave, get a better sub base. Yep. Okay. Anybody else have a possible thing you would do here? Test the soil and look at maybe putting in some under drains. But yeah, testing it. That's the one thing that you always, if you can, I know we always can't, but think about doing some tests. Figure out what's going on. Now you could do a core and all that stuff, especially because we have an old road system. I'm a huge fan of test pits. So in this case, come in here halfway, maybe go a little bit of a diagonal so it'll drain itself, and go all the way out into the ditch line and see what you've got, okay? Because you need to know what's going on in this particular case, because it may not be what you think. In fact, in this case, they did that. They actually came in here and they did a test pit, okay? And what they found was there was an old roadway here. Okay. The old roadway actually was clean. It was actually the cleanest material. They had paved it over the years, wider. This was actually a little bit dirtier material. And the only reason it hadn't failed was the middle was acting like a bathtub. And that's where people were driving. And the outside shoulders were horrible. They were really dirty. Okay. And so you can actually get a reverse effect where the center fails, even though it's the cleaner material. But without a test, you really wouldn't know. So what they did was they cut the shoulders out. They got rid of the shoulders completely. They milled everything up into a big windrow, spread it all back out. That became their new base, or sub base actually, because they wanted a little bit more gravel and paved over that. Sure, it cost more, but it'll last a lot longer. And it's pretty important to do that well, because this right here, this structure is the highway garage. And this is the main road to get from the state or county highway at the far end to the town hall. So you really don't want to have this one failing prematurely on you. It would look pretty bad. So keep that in mind. Think about the solutions. Think about doing some testing. And then we have, oh, this is for a different class. We're going to be doing ditches as a future webinar, but just remember, ditches are part of the equation. If they get too deep, they're not helping the surface and subsurface drainage, and they become a safety issue and an erosion problem. And of course, let's just end with a little bit of what do we do when there's a lot of water? Sometimes we just put it into a park. This happens to be a park down here in the city of Ithaca with just a pretty waterfall. Yeah, somebody said in the last one, you might need guide rail. Yeah, you might need guide rail there too. But hopefully our roads look like this when we're said and done. This is what we want to see. Nice, good, high quality, good crown, good drainage, roadway can last. And I told you I'd remind you again of our spring training. We do have one more webinar next week on flagging, our online workshop starting next week. And then we have a couple more on powers and duties during the spring and in-person workshops starting the week after next. So please go to our website, sign up. We hope to see you and out and about. And with that, if there's any questions, throw them in the Q&A. Otherwise, have yourself a great day. It's a little cool, but it looks like it's a nice day to get outside. Take care.